coming out from those who have very little opportunities to the world at large, where the divide between the super rich and the rest of us continues to grow at alarming rates. A new report published yesterday by international injustice fighting organization OXFAM reveals that 2015 saw an astonishing moment in the history of mankind. The 62 richest people on Earth now hold more wealth than half the Earth population. That is a ridiculous statistic. Title: An Economy for the 1%, and we now know who they are. Oxfam's report points blaming fingers towards tax havens for tycoons and corporations who are about to convene at the World Economic Forum set to open tomorrow in Davos, Switzerland. Much hair-raising data fills the report's 44 pages, and here's one fact to chew on. If inequality within countries hadn't grown during the period between 1990 and 2010, an extra 200 million people would have escaped poverty. So how bad is it? Discuss this and more. I'm joined, we're joined in studio by Yael Lavie, a reporter, a Jerusalem Post's economic reporter. Good morning to you. Before anything else, let's watch the following report.
The rich get richer, the super rich get ridiculously rich. That is the dramatic bottom line of an in-depth report by OXFAM, an international confederation of 17 organizations working worldwide to find solutions to poverty-related injustice. The report, timed to be published ahead of the annual World Economic Forum in Davos, a gathering ground for many of the world's ultra-rich, highlights the trend showing that 1% of the world population owns more wealth than the other 99% combined. Oxfam further demonstrates how the wealth of the poorest 50% dropped by 41% between 2010 and 2015, while during the same period, the wealth of the richest 62 people increased by $500 billion to $1.76 trillion, making them richer than half the world's population combined. The report does not name names, but is based on Forbes magazine list of the world's richest 500 people, among them Bill Gates, the Koch brothers, the Walton family, tech tycoons Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Sergey Brin, and Larry Page, and Benjamin Netanyahu's sponsor, Sheldon Adelson. Among the reasons mentioned in the report for the growing divide are aggressive tax dodging, lack of investments in public services, and low minimum wages. This obscene inequality, as Oxfam calls it, allows the world's largest companies to shelter $7.6 trillion offshore, starving poorer countries of the resources needed to tackle poverty. This sum of money, by the way, is more than the combined gross domestic products of Germany and the United Kingdom combined. Poor thinking, world governments, poor thinking.
Now, with me in studio, as I said, Yael Lavie of the Jerusalem Post. That's the most depressing bit of information that came out yesterday.
It is pretty depressing, but I have to say, this is the kind of statistic that we need to take a little bit with a grain of salt.
How so?
Serious economists have looked at this and they've said, we're not sure that we can get behind the methodology behind this.
Why?
Why? One of the reasons is, first of all, they have two different sources of information. The wealthy comes from Forbes and the rest came from Credit Suisse. And the Credit Suisse basically looked at net worth. Now that makes sense when you're talking about rich people who might not have a job or an income but have a lot that they own. But when you're talking about regular people, it doesn't make sense. Why? Say that you're a college graduate in the United States. You just took out a bunch of money in debt, right? And you're making a decent salary, $60,000 or something like that. You are considered as poor or poorer than a subsistence farmer in China. When you look at the sort of graph that they said of where the world's poorest people are, 10% were in the United States, 20% were in Europe, and almost none were in China. How does that make sense? The reason is that they looked at this sort of net effect on people that took into account their debt. And as we know, debt is an instrument that a lot of people use to advance, especially in advanced economies. So the
I would
estimate...
argue that if you look, specifically in the United States, those people that took out debt for the, for education remain in debt. There's studies that show that remain in debt
of course,
late into their 50s.
But even so, they're going to make an extra $1 million over the course of their lifetimes as a result of their degree. So when you're looking at something like that and saying that this is, in the poorest, these are the poorest people in the world, it doesn't make sense. It's comparing apples and oranges.
It's an interesting point because we're joined by Claire Godfrey from London, head of policy for Oxfam's inequality campaign. I don't know if, Ms. Godfrey, if you had a chance to hear what was said in studio right now, but when we're looking specifically at that report, what was the methodology behind it?
Well, we took the Credit Suisse figures, very credible figures on the incomes and wealth of the richest, and calculated with the numbers of earning adults in the world, and that's the figure we came up with. 62 people own as much wealth as 3.6 billion, who make up the poorest half of the world's population. And we've been doing that over the last 3 years now, and we've seen a trend that inequality is accelerating at a very fast pace.
And in a very, very fast pace. I have Ruthie Sinai here in studio nodding her head and saying...
No, that's what I wanted to say. I agree with Claire. I think the question is not whether it's 1% or 2% or 62 or 162. The fact is that inequality is growing. It leaps and bounds. And the other thing, there is a story. Do we have 1 minute for a story? Okay. There was a story here in Israel. There's a big supermarket chain, the second largest supermarket chain in Israel. They're about to go into receivership. 3,500 people are going to be left probably without a job. The director general of the holding company of the supermarket just took out $500,000 in bonuses. I ask you, why? What did he do that he deserves this? So they keep explaining, well, it's not exactly that, and it's not exactly this. But it is exactly that.
No, and it's Claire, I want to ask you, in the UK, coming out with that report, what is the suggestion of OXFAM to solve this? You know, what is a dire situation of inequality? And some would argue.
Yeah, we're focusing on 3 areas. It's very complex, and there are a number of areas, and we do need to start somewhere. I mean, one of the things that concerns us most, where we want international action, and that is on the global network of hidden tax havens. Trillions are held in tax havens, from super rich avoiding their taxes, multinational corporations shifting their profits to avoid tax. Now, that's one area where we can start redistributing wealth.
And I'm sadly losing the connection, but also time. Claire, I want to thank you, Niamh Ellis, as well, and Ruthie Sinai. Inequality, you can argue where it comes from. That said, it does exist.
For sure.
When we get back, something entirely different. Stay with us now, the news.